Hi, everybody. My name is Sean from Sean Sports Cards, and I do love sports cards. And it's been a while since I've done a YouTube video. I've been busy traveling the world, but I've also been really busy actually selling and buying cards. It's been a really busy few weeks. I had a couple of PSA returns come back. It's been really interesting. I haven't had the time to do the socials quite so much because finding that time is really hard in amongst life and everything else as well. But one of the things that I've noticed that has spurred me on and encouraged me to record another video for the first time in a while is I've started to see this drumbeat as we're now 6 weeks away from the 2026 Football World Cup in the United States and Mexico and Canada. This real sort of drumbeat of people talking about not buying into the hype and not getting caught out, not overpaying for things, and it's good warnings. And actually there's a bit of a common thread. I need to investigate this a little bit more, but there's a bit of a common thread of there's quite a bit of chatter out there at the moment in the wider media space about market crashes, market corrections. And I've read a few things recently about crypto crashing, which does happen, but more broadly about so to the stock market, the housing market. And I wonder if my ongoing thesis on that is people were so burned. I'm old enough to remember quite recently the global financial crisis and the fact that that caught so many people out. And I think people are so sensitive to not wanting to be caught out again that they are trying to get ahead of stuff, not necessarily. Now, this is not to say that the market won't crash, that there won't be a correction and things like that. That's always a possibility, and there's warning signs on dashboards for a reason. But I can't help but wonder if a lot of that sort of flows into that. But that said, because I'd been doing a bit of buying recently, because I've been doing a bit of selling, it's given me the chance to do a bit of buying. And one of the things that I'd started seeing was now is a terrible time to buy football cards. It's too late to buy football cards because the hype for the Football World Cup is starting to come up. And I sort of thought intuitively that makes sense. But I wanted to look at the data a little bit and just see actually what's the correlation, or is there much of a correlation between events, dear boy, and price movement in football? I've had a look at this kind of thing before. Is there a correlation between price movement and Formula One cards? So Max Verstappen winning titles and things like that. And the reality is there just isn't. And there's a load of people have done a lot of stuff out there that actually, as much as we like to think it is the case, and I think occasionally you do see this kind of stuff, and there is a received wisdom about it that, for example, going into the World Series, that's when you put your baseball cards up for sale, or going into the NBA finals, or the playoffs, that's when you put your cards up for sale. And people get excited about that stuff. But that's not necessarily the hype that people are talking about. So is there a link? I wanted to see, is there a link? What happened at the last World Cup? Was there a link between the performance and what happened? So I've seen a couple of things. This stuff turns up on my dashboard all the time, like Deep Value Investor, somebody on Instagram. And let's be really clear, just for the interests here, I'm not an analyst. Okay, I don't have that analytical brain. It's something that I have to work really hard at. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. If you're not good at it, try. These are skills. You can build these things. Everybody who's good at it started off being bad. But this Instagram story really sort of caught me. You front loaded the risk, the market took its profit, and you're holding the loss. And the best entry isn't at peak hype. And I think, for me at least anyway, and again, like, these people are much, much better than I am. This is my incredibly simplistic take on it. I think that's about 60% right, which is the best entry isn't at peak hype. It's waiting for that narrative to go away, to look at players in particular, if you're talking about football cards, or whatever market you're looking at buying cards in. Buying at peak hype is always a mistake, right? So the example of that might be, buying Shohei Ohtani recently and things like that. And a lot of people will point to, or Wemby is another one from the NBA side of things. People will say, well, look, but their prices kept going up. And yeah, but it's a gamble, right? What they're saying is the best time to buy, as you see on the image on the right there, the best time is to buy when the peak has died off. Now, my problem with that is there's usually a good reason why the peak died off. So if you look at buying somebody like a Pedri at the moment, or other players like that. So maybe somebody like a Bukayo Saka to a certain degree, who I'm not sure if that market has actually cooled. In American football, I was looking at buying Joe Burrow recently because I thought that hype would drop off. There's a reason that hype drops off, though. Okay, and what you're gambling on, I feel like, is that hype returning because of something happening, be it performance or whatever. But if there's no connection between performance creating that narrative to recreate that hype, then that card's never coming back up. Okay, so that second one feels a bit pie in the sky for me. It's just like, okay, when is that going to happen? Like, how often? I wonder how often that's happened, right? Where a player's value has dropped right off and then it's gone back up again. Because I think it makes sense. Again, in theory, it makes sense. But the reality is, I don't necessarily think that's the case, right? For individuals, and there's a thesis that I have underpinning all of this that sort of makes my argument. All right, this was the second one. Now, again, no shade, no shots at Slab Social Club in any way, shape, or form. There's a 70% chance that this is clickbait. Okay, but it was an interesting one. It did come across, and I did read it, and I did read the comments, and I found it interesting anyway. So I know you're capable of reading, but I'm going to highlight the bits, the couple of bits, the three things that really stood out to me about this story on Instagram. So the World Cup's going to create a massive bubble. Collectors are going to be holding worthless paper when it pops. Okay, that's the case for any bubble. Okay, I'm a believer in the kinds of people who talk about the fact that 80%, 90% of trading cards will be worth nothing at the end of the day, which is why you should always buy things that you would be happy to go to zero, because there's a very good chance that they will. The idea of trading cards as an alternative asset class that will rival things that have been going on for a long time is a flimsy case for now at best, I think. I like the idea, but the confidence is more out of hope than out of anything that you can point to, as far as I'm concerned. Okay, the two things on the right hand side that really caught my eye was, one, it happened in 2022, and two, the point two about FIFA overcharging people. Okay, let's start with the easy one first. FIFA is already overcharging everyone. Correlation is not causation. That has absolutely nothing to do with trading cards. The fact that FIFA are charging ridiculous amounts for prices has exactly zero bearing on trading cards whatsoever. So it's fascinating to me, the logic, the step you had to make to go from point A to point B on that is mind blowing to me. They're not related in the slightest. And when somebody makes a point like this, the academic part of my brain says, I'm not sure I can believe it. Like that is, it's legitimately such a silly point that everything else that you're saying, I'm going to question, because it's such a badly made argument. Okay. The second one, though, the other point, it happened in 2022, was one that I really wanted to look at, because I was like, is that true? Because I was there. Okay. I was buying into breaks for Qatar 2022. I remember, for example, you want to talk about the hype. One of the chases early on in 2022, if you don't already know, was Cody Gakpo. Cody Gakpo's rookie cards were ones that people were chasing. People wanted Netherlands break spots. Like, that was wild, because we didn't know that Messi was going to win the tournament. We didn't know what Mbappe was going to do. None of it was sort of baked in. But let's just pick this apart for a second. Okay, it happened that there was a bubble in 2022, and it popped. Okay, Qatar 2022 sent soccer card prices through the roof. Mbappe, Messi, everything spiked, and within 3 months of the final whistle, most of those games were gone. The tournament ends, the buyers disappear. So what that's making an argument for is that there is a link between performance on the pitch and events on the pitch and the prices. So let's dig into this a little bit. And I used my favorite data source, Cardladder. Now, I'm not very good at reading these things, but again, I think this is something worth teasing out about if you're thinking about buying football cards in the next 6 weeks. Because if that's true, right? If Qatar 2022 sent football prices through the roof, and then within 3 months of the final whistle, the games are gone, you shouldn't be buying football cards right now, because we're in the middle of the hype cycle, and you don't want to get caught holding the bag. Okay, you want to wait for that peak hype to end, and then buy in at the best entry point. So what you want to do is wait for after the World Cup, and then buy, Lamine Yamal or whoever you think is going to have a good 2026 World Cup. So let's look at the data. Okay, so what I've done is I've picked the data points on the graphs for when the 2022 World Cup took place. So we can just look really, really easily. It fits with the argument that is being made. Okay, there's a peak, and then the downward. So what this data would say, just looking at it on spec, is actually the market is only going to go down from now. It's a terrible time to buy, right? So I've picked three players that I thought were indicative of the run up to the 2022 World Cup players to watch. So Mbappe, Messi, Jude Bellingham, a little bit of an outlier. But what you saw there was big spikes in the running and then crashes to the tournament. And then, as it said there, a crash after the tournament. So based on this data so far, based on this single data or these three data points that we have, the thesis is right. Okay, there was a hype in the run up. You see these big spikes, and there's a hype in the run up, and then it crashes. Not just during the tournament, but pre-tournament as well. And the people who bought at the peak were left holding the bag. Okay, and in the and with these, particularly Mbappe and Bellingham, they never got back up. They're not even close to those hype spikes, right? Messi, if you had have bought at the hype, you see that spike afterwards. You got away with it, okay? So that it makes sense, right? Like you look at that and you say, okay, well that makes the thesis is right, Sean. What the heck's your problem? Okay, what is missing from this data though is when those peaks took place. Okay, so that's an important piece because I've got it scaled to all for Card Ladder. So did these peaks take place? Did the peaks for Messi and Mbappe and Bellingham? Let's have a look at Mbappe and Messi in particular. Did they take place 6 months before the tournament? Did they take place 6 weeks before the tournament? Well, let's look at Mbappe. And sorry that the data is a little bit small. The peak for Mbappe occurred in May of 2021. So you're talking, what, 18 months before the tournament. And his prices came down after that. So unless you're making the case that the prices crashed because people knew the tournament was coming a year and a half out and was selling into that, then this argument doesn't make sense. That there was hype running into the tournament. There wasn't hype running into the 2022 tournament for Kylian Mbappe because his prices were going down for a year and a half beforehand. And his prices continued to trend down. Likewise, Messi's index figure, index value was 47,940 during the World Cup, which if there had been hype around it, it had been super exciting, it had been driven by that event, that would have seen a spike in it or in the run-in or anything like that. No. Messi was at 133,881 on March the 1st, again, 2021. So what we're seeing here is if you want to make the case that hype is narrative-driven, prices are narrative-driven, and these are event-driven things, and that there was a bubble in 2022, and that there's going to be a bubble again in 2026. This data doesn't make any sense to me. Okay, you see a drop of what, 5 times for Mbappe and 3 and a bit times for Messi from 2021 to 2022 in the run-up to a World Cup. And then those prices continued to go down post-World Cup and only picked up again for both of them, Messi with a big spike, in the last 6 months. So you could make the argument that that is actually the pattern, right? That the pattern is the best time to sell is a year and a half out from a World Cup and then buy during the World Cup. Okay, but that's not, but what that would mean is the answer to the question that I posed at the front was, is now a good time to buy? Now is a good time to buy because prices are going down, hypothetically. Okay, another piece of data that I want to look at is, and this is where this is the argument I'm trying to make, okay, is I don't think it's about the events. I think it's about the overall market. Okay, I think what we're seeing, you look at these graphs, they all look quite similar, which is there's this big peak, right, in May of 2021, right when COVID checks were going out in the United States in particular, because the market is primarily US driven. Okay, the Card Ladder 50, which is it's sort of the NASDAQ or the FTSE of trading cards, has that peak in 2021 and then crashes. Likewise, Mbappe has a big spike in 2021 and then crashes. Messi has a big spike in 2021 and crashes. Okay, the correlation for me is not the events. It's not the FIFA ticket prices. It's not the Ballon d'Ors. It's not the Champions League. It's what is the overall market doing? The graph for the football on the right and the graph for the card ladder 50 on the left are quite similar. Okay, so what does that basically mean? So again, like you see these spikes and coming down again. Okay, 2021, 2022. For some reason, I've used the same index data. Oh yeah, so what I'm looking at there is so the overall market dropped by more than half from that peak of March 2021 through to the World Cup, was what I was trying to say with this one. Okay, which would make more sense. Obviously some players are going to crash a little bit more than others. Some players are going to crash. Mbappe crashed more than Messi. I would expect that. I would expect Messi to be one of the steadiest people in the market. But those prices changed in the run up to 2022 had nothing to do with a hype pre-World Cup and more to do with the overall trading card market. Okay, so the World Cup will create the biggest card bubble of 2026. I think it's demonstrably false. Okay, most collectors will be holding worthless paper when it pops, probably, but that's more a general thing. It didn't happen in 2022. It's nothing to do with overcharging everyone, and the smart money doesn't sell before the final. Okay, the smart money apparently sold 18 months ago. Okay, but I'm not sure that that's actually true. What I actually think is to answer the final question, is it a bad time to buy football cards? I actually do think it's a bad time to buy football cards because I'm not entirely sure it's a good time to buy cards at all because of that spike up in the graph on the right-hand side. Okay, I think we're in an upcycle overall for trading cards, just more broadly. I don't think it's tied to football. I don't think it's tied to hype cycles. I don't think it's tied to narrative. I don't think any of that stuff is necessarily true. Anybody who says to you with confidence that they can explain to you when a football card, a baseball card, a basketball card is going to go up or when it's going to go down and can tie it to any kind of evidence, I legitimately think they're full of nonsense. Okay, I don't think anybody can predict that. I think if it was that easy, then a lot of people would do it, and you would create a Patreon and make money selling that kind of stuff. And some people try to. Okay, I don't think it's that easy. I think there are hype cycles that are macro, that are tied to the overall economy, and I think with everything that's going on in the world at the moment, with talk about the current economic situation, what that's going to mean for the stock market, what it's going to mean for crypto, what it's going to mean for housing prices, what it means for oil prices, what it means for gold, all these kinds of things, right? Again, not an economist. I have a politics degree, but not an economics degree. I did one unit of macroeconomics and loved it and passed it, and then never wanted to do it again because the exam was too stressful for me. But I think now is a bad time to buy football cards, but it's got absolutely nothing to do with the World Cup, and it's got everything to do with the overall state of where the hobby is going and that trending line upwards. And whether I think the thesis for you, if you're thinking about buying, is do you think that trending upwards figure, whether it's Pokemon, whether it's One Piece, whether it's Star Wars, whatever, right? Do you think that trend upwards is sustainable, or do you think we're in line for a market correction anyway, coming down the line? But anybody who tells you that it's a bad time to buy football cards because of the World Cup, I'm not sure I necessarily understand the argument or the thesis that they're trying to make. So it's not for me personally. I'm buying because I'm doing the trading card version of dollar cost averaging, and I'm just going to buy through whatever for a while. But yeah, that was some thoughts that I had about some of the stuff that you're seeing out there in the world of trading cards at the moment, whether it's a bad time, what that means for the market. Drop me a like, drop me a subscribe. Tell me whether you think I'm completely full of nonsense or not. Again, like I said, not an economist, don't know what I'm talking about, but hopefully there was something in there for you whilst you're doing other jobs, having a little bit of fun. You might be making trading cards of your own, who knows? If you do, good for you. I'll see you soon. But thanks very much for watching, and hope to see you on another episode of Sean Sports Cards. Thanks very much.